Welcome to Martial Arts World Radio. I'm your host, Joseph Clark. Over the next hour, we have an interview with accomplished martial artist and cinema star LOREN AVEDON, and with UFC fighter Jason Saggo. Now, as many of you know, each week in every show, we speak to different fighters from the UFC, Olympic martial arts medalists, world champion martial artists, and icons, legends, pioneers of martial arts, many of whom have gone on to become stars of action cinema. I have a book to bring to your attention. Check out The Anatomy of Martial Arts by Dr. Norman Link and Lily Chow, an illustrated guide to the muscles used for each strike, kick, and throw. This week's inspirational quote is from Sugar Ray Leonard and goes as follows: "Bruce Lee was an artist, and like him, I try to go beyond the fundamentals of my sport. I want the public to see a knockout in the making." Sugar Ray Leonard.
This is world champion Steve Nasty Anderson. You're listening to Martial Arts World Radio with Joseph Clark.
Jason Saggo is a UFC fighter in the lightweight division who has both an impressive professional Muay Thai record and professional MMA record. He has demonstrated that he is both a strategist and a technician in the octagon. Now, we have interviewed Jason in a prior episode of Martial Arts World Radio, but here is a new interview with Jason, which has never aired previously. Jason, welcome back.
Hey, thanks for having me.
Now, Jason, your UFC contract, please tell us about that, because that really is the NHL of MMA fighting. Please share with us how that went down.
My last fight was in June, so just about a month before that, we were in discussions with my manager. He basically called me up one day and he said, "I got some news for you." And, I called him back right after training, and he let me know. He's like, "There's an opportunity to fight in the UFC. You could take it." I'm like, 100% I'm there, for sure. I think it's every MMA fighter's dream to be involved with the UFC because it's the fight at the highest level, right? It's the number one spot. Like you were saying, it's the NHL of MMA. So, that's where I wanted to be, and I was very grateful to have the opportunity to compete in the UFC.
How did you stay? Because as I understand it, you did audition or try out or appeal to the UFC about the Ultimate Fighter television program. So how did you stay on the UFC's radar? Was your manager responsible for that, or are you constantly doing self-promotion?
That's right. So I flew to Toronto to try out for the Ultimate Fighter Canada versus Australia, and I think that helped definitely put my name out there. And I think Joe Silva saw me because it was live trial, so we had we had to grapple, we had to hit the pads, and they were watching us. And then we also did interviews on camera and stuff like that, so they could see that my skills were up there. And I think I kind of left an impression on them, and I was very close to making the show. I think I was in the top 5 guys that they had to decide. So I was very, very close to making the show, and they just decided, I guess it was a better suit with some other fighters, but I think that left enough of an impression on them to invite me back again to compete in the UFC in Vancouver.
Jason, I'd like to zero in for a moment on that experience. So you're trying out for the Ultimate Fighter. You know that you're probably in the top 5. You know you've got their attention. How do you deal with the anticipatory nausea of not getting your hopes up too quickly before you knew? That must have been an emotional roller coaster ride.
It was, because you don't know, right? And you're trying to prepare your life because you don't know if you're going to be spending 6 weeks away, locked in a mansion with these other 16 fighters, and you have no communication with the outside world, and you don't know if it's going to happen or not. So, yeah, there's a lot of kind of stress generated towards that. But I think it actually ended up working out better for me in the end because I didn't have to do that. I didn't have to leave my partner for, those 6 weeks, and I was able to stay at home and focus on my training, and I still got to the UFC, which is where I wanted to be in the end anyway. So I think it ended up working out well for me.
Now, something I'm popular is saying on this show, I quote Dr. Wayne Dyer, who says, no matter where you've been and no matter what's happened to you, you had to have been there in order for you to be where you are now. However,
exactly. That makes total sense to me. Maybe it was it wasn't the right timing in my life to go away in that house for 6 weeks. But my goal and what I had on my dream board was always to, be in the UFC. I had UFC up there for the longest time, so I didn't know how it was going to happen. I didn't know when it was going to happen, but I just worked every day towards that goal, and thankfully it did happen. And it actually happened like less than 2 months after the show, so it was actually relatively quick.
That is relatively quick, and I think that really speaks volumes for how they must have felt about you through the process of selecting you and then deciding not to take you on with the Ultimate Fighter. They must have had you sitting in the back of their minds saying, we got to pick this guy up.
Yeah, that's what I think too.
Jason, not to dwell on the negative, but I think this is a really important aspect of your story. What was the level of disappointment when you found out you were not selected for the Ultimate Fighter?
Initially, at first, I was fairly disappointed because I kind of had my hopes because I knew that would lead me into being in the UFC. So I kind of thought that was the door, that was the opportunity, that's where I was supposed to be, and that's where I thought that was, okay, that's going to lead me to my goal of being in the UFC. And then when they told me, got down to the final 5 and I didn't make the cut, I was a little devastated, and I was, sad, but I still just got back on, the grind, and I was just like, all right, time to get to work, time to go back to work. I didn't really let it affect me. I'm just like, I know what I have to do to make it to the top, and I just stuck with my game plan of going back to the academy every day and training and putting the time in. And I knew I had belief that I was going to get there eventually, and I just stuck with my belief, and I did.
Good for you. I think that's a good lesson for all of us, that discouraging moments do happen, but it doesn't sound like you dwelled on it, and it does not sound like you let it weaken you from your pursuit of your ultimate goal to be in the UFC.
Don't let those discouraging moments phase you. If it's in your heart and if it's your passion, you just keep following that and give it 100%.
Speaking of ultimate goals, your long-term vision, have you got your sights set on the lightweight world champion for the UFC?
That's a good question. It's like I had it on my dream board for so long about being in the UFC, and then when it finally happened, it's like, goal achieved. And then now it's at that point in my life where it's time to reevaluate. It's time to figure out what's the next step. So I haven't quite reevaluated. I've just been focusing on this fight and being in the best possible shape for this fight. And eventually, I think after this fight, I'm going to have to go out there and set another goal, and I'm not exactly sure what that's going to be yet. I'm going to talk it over with my partner, and maybe it will be to be the number one lightweight fighter in the world. I'll have to see and evaluate what I want out of life, and because with that, if you decide to make that decision, you have to be prepared to make the sacrifices, and it's not just like, I want to be champion. There's so many sacrifices you have to make in life. You have to sacrifice time with your family, time with your friends. Mm-hmm. And it has to be a sacrifice that you're willing to make.
Now, I believe when I was doing some research for the show tonight, I caught, you've got a great web presence, and I caught some of your statements on the web. And I believe one of the statements that jumped out at me was where you remarked that it's all about that one night, that everything that you're training towards is about that one fight, that one night. Is that how you're dealing with it right now? You're just taking it one fight at a time?
Yeah, I think that's a good way to deal with it too, because fighting is like, and competing with martial arts is like the highest of highs and like the lowest of lows. So if you win your fight, it's like you're on top of the world. You're the best. Everyone sends you messages of positivity and congratulations and this and that, and you feel like $1 million. But then when you lose, you don't get the messages. You feel like, you're just down on yourself. You're disappointed in your performance. So it's the highest of highs and like the lowest of lows. So you got to be prepared for that. You have to be mentally strong, and you have to be mentally strong to come back after a loss. That's one of the hardest things.
I'm glad you brought that up, and I really think this is important, not just for a fighter, but I think it's important for all of us. But I'd like to talk a little bit to that. So let me set up some context here. I am a follower of the MMA. I'm a martial artist myself, and I have a real appreciation and respect for the sport. I also like to watch boxing and other competitive sports, but MMA in particular. Now,
cool.
There are times where I see fighters train and I see the tail of the tape, or I see the preliminary, bios that they do and the hype they build up. And it seems that the fighters are getting themselves mentally prepared to win that fight. A loss is not an option. It's not even something they want to think about. They want to fixate on the belt. They visualize and all of that. Now, I suspect that there are some fighters who, as part of that psychological conditioning, do not prepare themselves whatsoever for a loss. And then when they do in the event they do lose, they're completely unprepared emotionally and psychologically to deal with it. And what you just brought up is that you seem to feel that you do have to be prepared for any option, because anybody can win a fight and anybody can lose a fight, correct?
Yeah, MMA is a very unforgiving sport. So it takes one mistake. If you make one mistake, you could be knocked out. You could be submitted. And it's easy to do. I mean, we're humans. People make mistakes all the time. So if you make one mistake, it could be over. So I think, yeah, it's very important that you're prepared for that loss, and that even financially too, like you can't expect to win that bonus money. If you win, you get a fight purse, right? And then if you get paid to fight, and then you also get a win bonus if you win your fight. So you got to be financially prepared too. What if you don't get that win bonus, and that extra money isn't there? So it's like being mentally prepared, being financially prepared. You have to be ready to go either way, and you have to, again, be ready to just whatever happens, this is your passion, you're going to follow it through, and just being 100% behind the outcome, whether win or lose. For me, it's like I don't put so much pressure on, I have to win the fight. It's more of like, have I done everything in my power to prepare for this fight?
Now, this might be a very tough question to answer. I know it would be difficult for me to articulate this, but I must ask it. How do you emotionally prepare yourself for a possible loss without betraying the psychological conditioning of being determined to win?
Right. That's a good question. And it's kind of like same thing in life. Like I don't focus too much on the negative. So I definitely spend a lot more time focusing on the positive outcome of the fight and prepping myself. Like when I'm doing visualization, it's usually with me getting the upper hand on stuff. So, but to prepare for the loss, it's about kind of taking a little bit of pressure off of yourself and saying, winning isn't everything. Winning isn't your life. Like if you win the fight or you lose the fight, is your partner going to love you the same? Yes. Are your true friends going to be around? Yes, they're going to be around. They don't care whether you win or lose. It's people that, try to associate your success with them. Those people, they'll only be around when you win, but they're not even really true friends. They're not really there for you. They're just there for themselves. So it's kind of just realizing that win or lose, everything's going to be okay. Life goes on. It's not the end of the world.
It's not the end of the world, indeed. And your current training regime, can you describe what a typical day is like for you?
Training usually from 9 to 11:30 in the morning, and then in the afternoons I usually go into the academy at 4:30, and I'm there till about 9:30 at night, and that's a mix of my own training and teaching. So is
that 7 days a week?
No, because it's important that you have your day of rest. So your body's like a machine, right? If you keep driving the machine and you keep on destroying it, because all we're doing is we're punishing our body when we're training. Your muscles are getting ripped up, you're getting tweaked, your body's getting contorted. So if you do that 7 days a week, you will be destroyed. You won't make it through 2 weeks of your training camp. So I think having the 1 day of a full rest and recovery where you have like an Epsom salt bath, you let the muscles relax, you let your body rejuvenate and just replenish itself. I think that's really important to have that one full day of rest.
Jason, a few weeks ago, we had an interview with Elias Theodorou.
Yeah, I know Elias. He's a funny guy.
And actually, I was speaking to Elias, and he mentioned that he knew you as well, and definitely seems there's a mutual respect there.
Yeah, definitely. He's a really solid dude. I think he's got the skills. He won the Ultimate Fighter. He's great on TV. He's a personality, right? So I think he's great for the sport. He's kind of got all the characteristics to be successful.
During that show, one of the questions that I asked Elias is I said, what sacrifices are you willing to make for the sport? And I clarified for him. I said, you're a good-looking guy. You've got a really good screen presence. You've got, like you just mentioned, Jason, I said to him, you're very charismatic on the television.
Yep.
And I said, you're in a profession where people get beat up, they get cauliflower ears. Right. And I said, so I hear that you're a hard worker and you're making all of these sacrifices for training, but just how far are you willing to go in terms of the personal sacrifices for this career? And his answer to me was, as far as I'm concerned, the body is just a vessel. I'm willing to give this career whatever it requires, whatever it takes. So I'd like to propose the same question to you, Jason. In terms of personal sacrifices, how far are you willing to go for this career?
I probably wouldn't take the exact same stance as Elias, just because I believe for me, health is the number one priority. So if I'm kind of fighting and near the end of the career, let's say I keep on getting knocked out, I'm not going to keep fighting if I feel my health is at risk. Like I said earlier before in the interview, I want to be able to remember my kids and my wife. And if you're looking at anything you do with head trauma, I think people should look at it a little bit more seriously, because this is stuff that's going to affect you after your career is over. So you can live in the limelight for 5 to 10 years, but what about afterwards? What about when your career is over? How does it affect your relationship with your friends, your family? Are you going to have slurred speech? I think that's serious to consideration. Like, you should really look into that.
Yeah, those are all very good points, and I'm glad that you brought that up. And that is a very interesting stance, because I think all too often the uneducated viewer or the general public who doesn't necessarily educate themselves on MMA, who look at this as just a human cockfight, I don't think they realize that these are considerations that are important to the fighters themselves.
Oh, very much so, very much so. And that's why it's like everyone here has a limited time in the sport, so you better make the most of it. If you're only here for the next 5 years, you better make those 5 years like the highlight, of your entire career. You got to give it your all. So that's what I'm going to do. I know I'm not going to be involved with the sport for more than 10 years in terms of being a competitor, but let's say I got 5 solid years. I'm going to make the most out of those 5 solid years. And if it comes to the point where I'm not able to compete at the highest level, and my health is suffering, maybe I'm going through concussion or concussion symptoms, then I'm going to know when it's time to call it quits.
Jason, can you tell us a little bit about your early days? Where did you grow up? What were some of the things that caught your interest as a child? Maybe give us a little bit of background.
I grew up in a really small town, Caledon, Ontario, or Bolton, Ontario, just really small place. Everyone knew everybody. Just a quiet life, not too much, just typical, I guess, teenager things, I think actually what happened when I was younger was I used to, around when I was 12, 13 years old, it's I used to drink too much, go out and party and stuff like that. And I think eventually I just got sick of it. I had so much alcohol in my system. I'm just this is horrible. I never want to feel like this again. And that's why, I completely stopped drinking. I don't drink alcohol at all anymore. And I think it's because when I was younger, I did it way too much. And I think that really turned me off. So I think that's one of the reasons that helped me focus now today, is just because I'm just avoiding all that. I don't really go out and party. I don't want to be part of that scene. I don't want to be drinking alcohol and feeling crap the next day. So in that way, it benefited me.
Yeah, I would presume that when you're training, alcohol would really diminish your gains.
Yeah, it definitely, from what I see from my training partners that do drink, I know they're not the same when they go out after a night of partying and they're up till 2 a.m. drinking, doing shots. I can tell. I'm yeah, you were out last night because you're a step behind today.
And why martial arts? What was it that interested you in the first place?
I've always been interested in martial arts my whole life, but I think when I was in university, just messing around on the heavy bag one day, and my friend said, hey, why don't you come out to this class? And it was just a karate Muay Thai class, and I was hooked after I did that one class. I just knew it was my passion. I knew it was what I loved and what I wanted to do the rest of my life.
And how long have you been a martial artist?
Since we're 21 years old, so relatively new.
You attended the University of Guelph. What program were you involved in?
Originally, I was in computer science, and then I switched over to studying philosophy and psychology.
Oh, very interesting. And from a philosophical side, or in respect to that consideration, would you consider yourself a follower of different philosophies, or even is there a spiritual side to Jason Saggo?
Spiritual side. That's a good question. My philosophy is just to be open, don't be so closed off and so closed-minded. That's what I really enjoy about traveling, is because you get to go to different cultures and hear other people's perspective, and to know, for example, growing up here in Ontario it was Christianity, and then to go to a place like Thailand where their primary religion is Buddhism, and to hear just different life philosophies. I think it's really important to go out there and just see what the world has to offer. Sometimes you have to leave your comfort zone. You have to leave your current environment and see what else is out there. And I think a lot of people would be really surprised that, wow, I can't believe these people have this perspective and it's so different from my own. It's not who's right or wrong. It's just figuring out what works for you.
And, that's a very interesting statement you just made, that you have to leave your comfort level. I'm a firm believer that there is no growth without discomfort, that we must be challenging ourselves and going beyond our comfort level in order to grow. And, of course, there's a distinction in today's world between spirituality, religion. And so having traveled the world, you've probably seen some pretty interesting sights. Is there anything in particular from your travels that stands out as a story you wish to share?
I guess just like what surprised me most about my travels was just the good nature of humans. Like I see people here in the West who have so much. They have all these material possessions, but yet they don't want to share anything. It's like it's all theirs, and it's all about their ego, and this is mine, and how dare they even, approach me and stuff like that. It's just a lot of attitude I find over here. But I find when I was traveling like in Vietnam and Thailand, like people would have nothing. Like these families, it would be like a whole family, like just 5-6 people living in like this one bedroom place just on like stilts, and they had nothing, but they would invite me in to have a meal, and they barely had enough food to feed their own family. So it's just like incredible difference just in mentality and their willingness and openness to share versus I find sometimes over here where some people can be really closed off and just a little bit greedy and egotistical. And not saying that everyone is, but it's just I've noticed that big difference. And that really traveling, throughout all my years of school and going to university, I learned more traveling and being on the road and interacting with people from different cultures than I ever did through traditional school. So I would really encourage everyone and anyone to go out there and travel and to leave your comfort zone and to just be open-minded and to try to hear somebody else's perspective and to hear their beliefs and their values.
You have been listening to my interview with UFC fighter Jason Saggo, and special thanks to Jason for a terrific interview.
Hi, I'm Bob Wall, a World Full Contact Karate Champion, and I'm the co-star of Enter the Dragon. You're listening to Martial Arts World Radio with Joseph Clark.
For those of you listening to Martial Arts World Radio while on your phones, tablets, or laptops, be sure to check out www.worldblackbelt.com. That's Bob Wall's World Black Belt, the world's foremost martial arts online community. Also, check out fight promotion platform Global Legacy Boxing at www.glboxing.com. Global Legacy Boxing, dedicated to furthering boxing as a premier sporting, cultural, and entertainment event. Loren Avedon is a martial arts cinema star with a 5th Dan black belt in Taekwondo and an 8th Dan black belt in Hapkido. He has appeared in over 24 films and several television appearances, including the movies King of the Kickboxers, No Retreat, No Surrender 2 and 3, and Tiger Claws 3, to name just a few. And he has acted with co-stars such as Jalal Marie, Cynthia Rothrock, Olivier Gruner, Billy Blanks, comedian Russell Peters, Carter Wong, Keith Cook, and Philip Ree, to name but a few. Loren, welcome to Martial Arts World Radio.
Thank you, Joseph. It's a pleasure to be with you.
Loren, at what age did you begin taking martial arts instruction?
Well, I dabbled in it in my teens, but with no real structure. I got into it seriously when I was almost 18. A week before I turned 18 years old, I walked into Junchang Taekwondo. And that's when the serious stuff began.
And who did you study under for Taekwondo?
Oh, well, Master Junchang, Masters Philip Ree and Simon Ree, Master Peter Lulgerai, and the list goes on, and Bill Wallace, who would actually teach some of the advanced classes at Juncheng. And Master Wallace would use me as his demo dummy.
It's some very impressive instructors. And how about for
Hapkido? Name a
Hapkido?
few. Oh, Hapkido, Myung Kim, Grandmaster Inkan Park, and many, many others.
And Loren, who are your favorite martial artists?
Oh, that's a loaded question, Joseph. I think I could just spend our time talking about my favorites. Of course, my first masters, and Bruce Lee. Some of my favorite martial artists in film, Jackie Chan, Donnie Yen, my gosh, Sammo Hung, and the list goes on and on.
You know, Bruce Lee has to be... I ask that question a lot of my guests on this show, and Bruce Lee is the most popular first answer, and then people elaborate from there. Do you follow the UFC or MMA?
I do. When MMA first began, I wasn't that into it because it seemed more like a caged street fight. But now I follow it. I watch the Ultimate Fighter shows, and I have friends who are coaching in the business and who are masters in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, you know, the Machados. And I actually opened up one of the first BJJ tournaments in Hawthorne with Carlos Gracie. So it was pretty cool.
No kidding.
He let me say, and let the tournament begin. So.
And
cool.
are there martial arts performers who you have yet to star with, who you'd really like to be in a movie with?
Wow. Again, a loaded question. Yes. I mean, my favorite these days is Scott Adkins, just because he's such a great athlete. He's got the look, he's got the moves, and he can really do it. And there are a lot of others as well. And, you know, most of them are current stars, but there's some that I'd like to dust off, but I don't know if they're still doing it, like Hwang Jung Lee, for example. I would love to do another film with him. We never really got to do any scenes together, although he was my mentor and kind of coach on No Retreat, No Surrender 2, where I was baptized into the Hong Kong film scene.
Loren, you've had some really impressive instructors in martial arts. I mean, you are a true martial artist.
Thank you.
When it came to making films and being an on-screen performer, did you have mentors?
Absolutely. You know, the thing is in a lot of these movies that I did, there would be, say, your basic name value actors, Joseph Campanella, James Hong, Richard Jekyll, Don Stroud, etc. So
great names.
Right. So these guys, when I would get martial arts wise, getting to work with Billy Blanks and with Keith Cook and all of these incredible athletes and martial artists, it just raised my game. And whenever I would, you know, because when you're carrying a film or when you're playing a lead role, you make the movie in your mind. You know, I did, at least. And you kind of have some ideas about how you want to portray a character, what you have to make decisions. You have to be very specific. And but you also have to be in the moment when you're doing a scene. And it's really hard to do, especially when you're dealing with, 3 or 4 different languages and you're in a foreign country and you may not be feeling well, and, there's all sorts of things behind the scenes that nobody will ever know but you and the crew and everybody else. But working with other great talent, it just raises the bar for everyone. And I was always about what's best for the film, what's best for, what would my character do, and try to be true to that. And also be entertaining. So that's, it's a tightrope, but I am blessed to have worked with some really incredible people, both martial artists and actors as well. So, that's a blessing. And then the whole thing is you've got to be there. Acting is 99% behavior, and so when you're not doing anything, you're still on camera. You've got to have that energy, and that I would always say to myself, and this is kind of cruel to the others, that the audience is going to be watching me. I'm going to put out that presence, and so that's what I tried to do, but not try to not upstage anybody else per se, but just be 100% into it, and I hope that came across.
Loren, when you look over your resume of work to date, do you have a favorite movie from your own resume?
Oh, I'm one of these guys who has trouble watching himself. If I can pick two, I would pick Blood Brothers, because I think Keith and I did some really incredible fights in that film, and King of the Kickboxers.
Yes.
I think King of the Kickboxers is sort of a solo performance, or as a lead in that. That's the best one for me. But as far as the fights and the overall energy of the film, and working with an equal co-star, or actually, Keith was one of my heroes growing up. I'd always see him on the cover of Karate Illustrated or TKD Times or Inside Kung Fu or whatever magazine. He was on the cover of every magazine practically every week or month they came out. Yeah, I think King of the Kickboxers for me, and then Blood Brothers for the fighting with Keith and I.
And out of all of the films which you've made, is there a particular memory or experience that stands out?
I'll tell you, the first film I did, No Retreat, No Surrender 2, we were out in the middle of Thailand by the River Kwai, and the train would go by this particular river crossing where in the film it is supposedly a Buddhist retreat, not really a wat or a monastery, but like a retreat in the film.
Sure.
But those train tracks that I'm walking across along with Cynthia Rothrock and Max Thayer were built by British POWs in World War II, and they're still carrying the train that goes by a few times a day down that same track. And I can remember I was out on in the middle of this bridge, or this trestle that was right up against a hillside, and it started to rain. And then we heard the whistle blow for the train to come, and I'm in the middle of the tracks on this raised bridge, trestle, whatever you want to call it. And so I made my way off the tracks and down underneath where the train was going by, because I thought, well, if something falls down, or a rock or whatever, at least if I'm underneath it, hopefully I'd have a little bit of protection. And I can remember the train going over, and I just screamed as loud as I could, and then the train went past, and I came out and got back up onto my position and was ready to go again. But that was one incredible experience. And then along that same track, about, I'd say, a quarter mile up, there was a small cave opening, and you could go on your hands and knees into this cave, and inside the cave was a 30-foot tall Buddha.
Really?
And so those two things are what I remember at this moment. I mean, there's so many, I could just go on and on. But yeah, being under the bridge, not across the River Kwai, but near the River Kwai, that was built by by all of those Brits who perished, a lot of them. It was a surreal moment. So I thought a scream was a good idea at the time.
Would be a surreal moment. How high was the bridge?
Well, it wasn't really a bridge. It ran right along the edge of the river. But I'd say it was about 30 feet from the water to the top of where the railroad tracks were, and maybe about 12 feet or so to get down and underneath it. And again, this is on the sort of tucked into the side of a hill. So yeah, it was high enough. Put it that way.
And this was in Thailand.
In Thailand, on the river, right by the River Kwai. When you watch that scene in No Retreat, No Surrender 2, when Max Thayer and Cynthia and I cross the river and we go into this supposed monastery,
sure.
That's the place. That's the place.
Where have your various travels taken you while making films?
Oh, my gosh. Pretty much every continent, except for Australia. I have yet to visit Australia. But no, I mean, I've shot in Russia. I've shot in Asia, everywhere from Korea, Thailand, Japan. Let's see. Did a little thing in East India. Of course, in Europe, France, Great Britain. Yeah, and the list goes on. And in Canada, done several films in Canada as well. And Lebanon with Jalal Marai doing Operation Golden Phoenix. And, I could carry on with many other places as well.
Yeah, I remember Operation Golden Phoenix with Jalal Marai.
That's it.
Loren, for anyone who's thinking of working in martial arts cinema, is there something in particular, a tidbit of advice that's important that they be aware of going in?
Any aspiring actor, martial artist, you've got to love what you're doing. I fell in love with martial arts, with Taekwondo, when I walked into the Dojang in Los Angeles. I fell in love with that. I couldn't get enough of it. And it was a challenge to me. And then I happened to be invited to an acting class when I was 18, and I went, and it challenged me. I didn't like how nervous I was in front of 12 people just reading some words on a piece of paper.
Sure.
And so that was a challenge. And so I looked at all of these things as methods or ways that I can grow and develop as a human being. And it just so happens that I lived in Los Angeles, was born in Los Angeles, and had been around the industry my whole life, and happened to get lucky when the phone rang and signed a 3-picture deal, and that's how I got in front of the camera as a star of a film. But I was willing to do anything, and they were calling the martial arts school to get guys who could kick and, take a punch or, go through a window or do whatever, because most of the Hollywood stuntmen at that time weren't very adept at kicking. So my advice to anybody starting out and wants to be a martial arts action star, for example, is just be ready for anything and be ready to train and do anything, and do it because you love it. If you're not enjoying yourself and you're not developing as a human, as a person, then I would have to ask myself, why am I doing this? Am I doing this for fame, fortune, or am I doing this because I love it? And, of course, if you do something you love, you never work a day in your life, although, of course, it is a lot of hard work. So my advice is to any of the martial artists out there that want to get into acting, find some great acting coaches. Any martial artists that want to get into film, start learning some choreography, learn about camera, learn about blocking, get in there and do whatever you can to get experience. And, do it because you love it.
Loren, looking back on your career to date, are there particular events or crossroads that have impacted the direction of your career?
Absolutely. When I did get to do those films in Asia, it was very frustrating waiting and wondering what the next project would be. I thought I would come back to the States and start working as an actor and as a martial artist, but that didn't happen. So what I learned is how to channel, all of this time and energy and desire into, moving forward and just continuing on with whatever the process was. When my daughter came along, and when I got married, my daughter came along, that was a huge change in everything, because I had to consider, my family, and I didn't want to be away from my daughter. And I can remember my wife looking through the scripts and going, "Oh, this looks kind of dangerous," or this, or "I don't want you to do that," or so on and so forth. And so, there were some considerations. And in film, or in any sort of artistic endeavor that involves more than just yourself, there's always going to be situations that come up that are beyond your control, such as Keith Vitale breaking his arm 3 days before we're supposed to start shooting No Retreat, No Surrender 3. So that, almost changed everything in my life, but he was able to come back after a week and play that role. And there are just many, many other things that have challenged, me, and that is all, and that has to do also with my own growth and development, and my own ideas about, what I thought. And I made some decisions that, I probably should have made differently in hindsight. Of course, hindsight's always 20/20. But
always.
Let's just say I could have worked a lot more had I not been so particular.
Loren, you just mentioned something there a moment ago about personal growth, and I can relate. I've walked in the shoes of unfortunate human events, things that were very challenging, at times things that are very heartbreaking, emotional moments. And out of these moments, it feels at that time like your world is ending, but out of those moments, you experience great periods of personal growth, and we come out of those moments much stronger. Are you able to relate with us some challenges that you've experienced in your life where you came out stronger and grew as an individual as a result of perhaps unfortunate challenges?
Well, I can say virtually that's the story of my life, I think. I'm an only child from a single-parent home, and was exposed to a great deal, but did not have a great deal of resources. And so anything that I wanted to do, I could do. And my mom would tell me this. She'd say, "You can do anything you want, just go out and do it. Apply yourself and go for it." And I just lost my mom a couple years ago, and I spent 8 years taking care of her, both in-house and so on and so forth. And that was a huge thing to do for me. But the thing that happens when you go through these challenges and these periods of adversity or of great joy or of great success is what I learned is to temper myself and always try to ground myself, and realize that good or bad, this is just a moment in time, and you're meant to learn. I'm meant to learn something from this. And so I think I'm a little hard on myself. And people say, "Loren, you're pretty hard on yourself." And the thing is I feel I have to be, because if I'm not, I'm going to get, I'm going to hear it from somebody else if they really care about me. And so I'd say taking care of my mom, being a father, those are two of the greatest things that I've done in my life. Doing the movies and being a stuntman, and I've done, in order to pay the bills, hundreds of episodes of television as a stuntman that people don't know about, and that's fine. But you got to pay the bills, So
Sure.
it's constantly. Every day is a process, or can be a process of learning, no matter what happens that goes your way or doesn't. And usually, in my case, there's a lot of challenge, or there's a lot of work, or there's a lot of something involved to overcome whatever it is. But all you have to do is just go through it. And so that's what I've learned is to just take it, one moment at a time, do the best you can, do the right thing, and you will never have any regrets.
Loren, what are you first, a martial artist or an actor?
Well, I started as a kid doing commercials, but that's because my mom was a commercial producer and director. I wasn't really acting. I was, 5-year-old kid, so you do what, go drink that glass of milk. Okay. But I first, as far as my adult life, was am a martial artist, because martial arts carries me through, every moment of my life, because of what I've learned and what I've experienced. The instant accountability of martial arts. And then, acting is just a way of learning to, control or express emotions or behavior from a character's perspective. And, so that's also, a huge thing to learn and to grow into. But always martial arts, because martial arts is what I love and what brought me to all of these other things.
Have some of your martial arts lessons or training served as a metaphor for living, a metaphor for life?
Absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, it's not how many times you get knocked down, it's how many times you get up. And, that's what I meant about instant accountability. You can't hide when you're on the mat. You can't, when you do group training or private sessions, or you're testing, or you're sparring, or you're doing whatever, you're doing things as a group if you're in the class with, the instructor, but you're also doing them individually, and you're able to sort of assess your performance along with everybody else that's near you. And I always wanted to be the best, or do things the best that I could, and have the best control, have the best range, distancing, know my opponent and, their weaknesses and exploit them, et cetera, et cetera. So that's, what we do in life. We have to know our strengths, weaknesses, and opportunities and make the best of them.
Loren, I'm going to wrap up our interview in just a moment, but I wanted to ask you, one of the joys and splendors of doing this show is the relationships that I make, the contacts that I make, because I'm a fan. And I'm an enthusiast, and I'm a martial artist myself. So sometimes I have to pinch myself when I'm doing these interviews. But one of the other joys of doing this show is researching about the guests. And it's so invigorating and exciting and interesting, because everybody, I don't care who you are, everybody's story is interesting. Mine, yours, anybody's. So it's a lot of fun, and it's very intriguing and interesting when I do the homework to prepare myself for these interviews. Now, is there anything that I haven't asked you today that is relevant that you'd like to share with the audience?
All I can say is that in this current world that we're living in, we live in a very uncertain sort of time. It seems like there's a lot of not so good stuff going on in the world, and a lot of mass migration, I guess you could call it, because of war. A lot of things that are not insurmountable, but whether it's climate change, whether it's this or that, we all have our own personal feelings and our own personal ideals, and is that we can come together once and for all, with this global communication ability that we have now. I wish we can reset, or we could reset, and really start reprioritizing what is truly valuable as human beings. If you were to ask me a question, the question for me is what are we doing for each other, and how do you feel about the way human beings are towards each other? And I would just like to, I would like to see the world set aside all differences and come together as one. And so the question is, how do we do that? Well, I think we, just take a breath and choose love instead of hate, or choose to understand rather than to dismiss or deny.
Yes.
And I hope that we humans, through martial arts, through whatever experiences we have in our lives, we come together and we reprioritize, shall we say, what's important about being a human being. For me, it's love, and it's giving, and it's sharing, but it's also accountability, which seems to have gone out the window. So I hope that in the world that my daughter will inherit, and your children, that we just come together. We push all of this other stuff aside, and we come together.
Well said, well said. Loren, thank you for sharing today. I wish you all the success that you surely deserve, and I really appreciate, again, your candor and all of your insights and everything that you've shared today. Thank you once again.
It's my pleasure, Joseph. My pleasure.
You have been listening to an interview with accomplished martial artist and cinema star, Loren Avedon. Be sure to check us out at our website at www.mawradio.com, or at Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn, and YouTube by following Martial Arts World Radio. Thanks for listening. I'm Joseph Clark, wishing you safe travels.